Keely? Good morning, everyone. I'm Keely Hopkins. I'm the State Director for the National Rifle Association for Arizona, Oregon, and Washington. I know Arizona's been covered, so I'll focus on the Northwest. With Washington and Oregon at this point, unfortunately, it seems like both of them are in a race to see who can catch up to California's gun laws the fastest. Historically, Washington and Oregon have both had relatively good gun laws. In the last 4 or 5 years, however, things have changed. We've both lost seats in the legislature, but we've also seen several initiatives filed within the Northwest. So in both of these states, we're seeing anti-gun groups funded by Bloomberg come in and use the initiative petition process to pass what they weren't able to get through in the legislature. In Washington, for example, we've had 3 major initiatives since 2014. It started with the private transfer ban, where you're not allowed to transfer or loan a firearm to another individual without becoming a felon. We also had extreme risk protective orders without due process. And then last year, we had Initiative 1639, which unfortunately did a variety of things. One of it was classifying all semi-automatic rifles as assault rifles, which we know why they do that, so that next year they can come back and ban assault rifles. In Oregon, we're seeing the same thing. We had groups file 2 initiative petitions last year. One was an outright ban on all semi-automatic firearms, and then another was mandatory storage. And the worst part of this is they impose strict liability. So if somebody were to access your firearm if you didn't have it stored locked up, you would be held strictly liable for anything that's done with it. In Oregon right now, both chambers are controlled by a supermajority of Democrats. We also have a very anti-gun governor. We do still have several Democrats that are pro-gun, which has been how we've been able to hold the line. This year, we faced the biggest threat that we've seen so far, which was an omnibus gun control package, Senate Bill 978. This bill had maybe 5, 7 provisions in it. It would have legalized age discrimination so that FFLs could refuse to sell firearms to adults under 21. It again had the mandatory storage with strict liability. It also would have required you to report lost or stolen firearms. If you fail to do so, you'd again be held strictly liable for what the criminal does with your firearm. It also would have vastly expanded gun-free zones to include public buildings, colleges, the airports, but interestingly enough, it also included any land that's adjacent to any of these properties, which when you add all of that up, that's a large area that you would no longer be allowed to lawfully carry your firearm. Thankfully, the Senate Republicans refused to pass something that would have made Oregon's law-abiding gun owners become criminals overnight. So they used one of the only tools they had in the superminority, and they did a walkout. By not showing up to the floor sessions, they were able to prevent a quorum so that the Democrats in control couldn't conduct legislative business. So because of this, we were able to hold off, and long story short, no gun control passed this year in Oregon. In Washington, we also had a huge attack on Second Amendment rights. We had hearings on over 25 different anti-gun bills this session. The top bills that we were facing were a ban on standard capacity magazines holding more than 10 rounds, mandatory training and other red tape in order to get your concealed carry license, and also, again, the expansion of gun-free zones to include libraries, public parks, and even child care centers. We had the Senate Republicans and 4 Democrats, so we did not have the votes to pass it this year, but it will be carried over to next year. Across the board, though, what has made the difference in the Northwest has been grassroots. We have activists contacting their lawmakers, showing up at hearings, attending town halls, and this has been what has encouraged the legislators to do the right thing and to fight for our Second Amendment rights. Heading into the next legislative session, and especially heading into next year's elections, we have to make sure that we're all continuing to build these pro-gun networks and make sure that we have our voice heard. We can't let Moms Demand Action be the only voice that our legislators are hearing. Thank you very much for your time.